There's Harley. How you doing, Harley? You ready for Mom to do a sewing project? Yes, you are. Okay, I go do it. Where's Bam Bam? Where's your brother? Huh? Who knows? Bam Bam's funny. All right. Now, I have all these cords that I have to set up. A couple of things that I wanted to point out about making the little yo-yos, and that is you need this size paper clip. Otherwise, you end up with a paper clip deficit. I mean, I've got a couple up there, but you end up with a paper clip that only comes to here, but not for this one. And as far as making the yo-yos go, I don't know that I could go much smaller than this. There could be a way, but I don't know if I could just stand to do it. So this is not the one I used. It was this one. Okay. Right. So I have a 2.5 inch circle, and that's my pattern for these little small yo-yos. And as of today, this little stack over here, the florals, I did on the sewing machine, and they have a unfinished inner circle. That's just raw edge right there. These, I can't prove it because I don't have one, but I've been hand sewing them and folding in my hem so that the piece underneath the button is completely finished. So it has a little bit of a, a finished edge on it when you gather it all up. So that's kind of where I am at this particular point. I've also been making 6.5 inch yo-yos, which are finishing, by hand, and they're, a little bit bigger, but not. They're bigger than this, which that's the way this looks on the inside. It's a little folded under, finished edge. These I've also been doing by hand. And I have them scattered all over the house. They're in my bedroom, they're in the kitchen, they're in the living room, they're in the den. And I started to pick them all, just bring them with me back to the sewing room, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to make a basket. So today's project will start with a fabric basket, and then we'll move on to what I'm doing with my yo-yos. So I already cut out 2 pieces of fabric, and let's see, no matter how much I think I'm preparing, I'm not prepared, ever. All right. The reason I struggle so much when I'm moving in my chair is because I had to put a rug underneath, and which I love the rug. Unfortunately, the chair, which is it's non-sponsored, but I got it for my birthday. It's a Dominic chair. I love it. It's great. It's comfortable. It's perfect for somebody who has physical limitations like I do. Really bad knees, really bad hips. I have to be at a certain height. I can't be too low. I need to be able to stand up. This chair, you guys, is great. It was actually inspired by a chair that I saw another YouTuber, and I told my husband about it, and then he did some research, and being an engineer and somebody who has worked in ergonomics, decided that this chair was probably the chair that I needed. I'll try to remember to show it at the end of the video. Okay, there's a button. I knew it was under there. So what I did this morning is I cut out 2 pieces of fabric in kind of a weird way. I'm trying to conserve the fabric I have here because I'm making masks and I'm using the scraps from making the masks to make yo-yos. I was going to complete the projects in the Simplicity 8532 video or pattern, but at the moment, with COVID-19, I feel like I'm going to just save all the fabric I happen to have on hand for masks. I have a massive handful of them completed. I have some going to a business and some going to a friend. I've already sent 2 batches to a hospital in Kansas, and I feel like if the need is that great, I don't need to be, making frou-frou stuff at the moment. So this I need. I'm sorry guys, but I do. I need a way to kind of transport my projects from room to room, and I feel like this little fabric basket is light enough that it's not going to be that intrusive, and I can leave it in the other rooms. If I go from here to a different room, this isn't going to be some like a laundry basket or a big metal bowl clinging around. And I'm hoping that it will work. So I folded my fabric deliberately in this way. I wanted a lot of interior space. I don't particularly need a whole lot of depth. So, I mean, these little yo-yos don't take up any space at all. And a spool of thread and a needle, a pair of scissors. I just don't need something that's tall. I need something that's wide. So I had this that I just got recently. I made placemats out of it. The rest of it was going to go to masks. I have quite a bit of it left, so I could make probably about 10 masks even after this got cut. I wanted to maximize the cut. I didn't want to just indiscriminately cut this out. So I folded my fabric in such a way that it left a lot of fabric. Otherwise, I would have had a big piece like this cut out in the center, and that's not what I wanted to do, because then I would have just had like these little weird sides and not enough to do more than a couple of masks, maybe 4 masks. So I cut this, and as you can see, it's like that, and then the fold is down here. And I am going to box the bottom, so I'll need to cut out the area down at the bottom on both sides to box the bottom. But I'm not gonna make a sewn seam. I'm just gonna leave this folded. I think that's fine for my purposes. And then I cut this, the lining fabric, which I realize isn't really a good match, but I don't care. If I were selling it in a shop, I might be a little bit more, I don't know, that doesn't really go. But I'm using fabric I have. I'm using what I have on hand. This is appealing to me. This is appealing to me. They kind of don't go together, really. I mean, the colors aren't that bad. There's a blue that is exactly the same shade of blue in here. There's kind of a goldy, greeny color that's the same, but the style is a little bit different. Why is there probably because I left the door open, or there's a fly in my sewing room. So that's why I just decided I don't want to use the white. I do have a whole bunch of white broadcloth that I don't want to use because I'm using that for masks. This is pure hibiscus tea, by the way. I love it. So, my plan, let's see, I've got kind of a non-perfect edge right there I need to fix. So I will go ahead and take care of that. And one thing I've learned from the decades of sewing that I have been doing, if you go slowly, if you move slowly and with a little bit of precision, you don't have to square everything up on the cutting mat with the rotary cutter, you can actually use your other tools and then just take your time, you know, work slowly and carefully. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us. My sister and I always talk every morning. She calls me from Alabama, so she's 2 hours ahead of me. We're 2,000 miles apart. That tea is so good. I got up at 2:30 and I started looking for something to bake. I think yesterday was National Baking Day or something like that. I'm not sure. But anyway, I saw that and I just, because we were working out in the yard, I did not have time to come up with something. But I love to bake, so I decided today to make cheese scones, and they turned out so yummy. If you want the recipe, drop me a comment and I will be happy to share. And I'll tell you right now, if you do decide that you want to make these, there's a way to hack it so that you can either do regular flour and the rest of your ingredients, or you can use self-raising flour, or if you call it self-rising flour, and just a tiny shift in your other ingredients. You can also make this recipe vegan. The other great thing about that recipe is that if you don't want cheese, you can make the recipe blueberry, which I'm kind of on a big blueberry kick right now because they are so awesomely good for you. But you can substitute any other fruit. I haven't tried peaches yet. I haven't tried pears. But I think a pear blueberry blend would be really good in a scone. Okay. So I am going to now, because I want to cut both pieces of fabric at the same time. I don't want to cut this piece and then have it done and then go back and do the exact same thing again, when I can actually save time by not having to do that. The other reason is if I cut these out, and I'm very precise and very careful, but I cut them out at the same time, then they will be exactly the same on both sides. So the way I achieve that is I take a pin and I'm going to pin away. I'm going to have the point of the pin away from down here, so it's pointing in the opposite direction. And I'm going to go basically on the bias with my pin. Oops, it's too low. So across the grain of the fabric that way, and then I'm going to take another pin and I'm going to do the exact same thing going the other direction. So I have kind of this cross situation going on here, and that really holds that in place right there in the area just above this space that I need to cut out. However, this down here can shift. So I can either pin it up here at the top or I can pin it down here at the bottom, and that's what I want to do. My preference is to pin as close to the area I'm going to cut out as I possibly can. I don't want to move the fabric too much in the process, but I do want to make sure that the point of the pin is away from this area. Some people don't mind getting poked or stabbed by pins. I can't stand it. So I'm going to use very sharp Ginger. I don't remember where I bought these. I've had them forever and they're still really sharp. I used to sell the complete metal handled Ginger scissors in my shop. They didn't stay as sharp as these. I have no idea. I cannot remember where I bought these, but I really like them. Okay, so I'm going to cut out on this line, and the little square that I made is 2 by 2, so it's 2 inches by 2 inches. Right up in that corner, and then take my time. I'm also very aware that the back part of my arm where my elbow is close to those pins. Okay, so I have those. And I'm going to leave this pinned because it will help, keep this sturdy and in place. And I'm going to cut out the other side. I'm trying to keep these butterfly pinhead things out of the area that I'm cutting. So I don't know what things are like where you live, but I do hope that wherever that is, that you are well and that you are healthy, and everyone that you love and care about is well and healthy. I hope that you are able to enjoy sewing or crafting, gardening, baking. Enjoy the people in your life. I hope that everything is going well for all of my wonderful dandelions. And I do appreciate each and every one of you. As of right now, I am 1 subscriber away from 50. I'm probably the slowest growing YouTube channel out there. I probably have set some record for being the absolute slowest, but that, as you can see, is the way I do things. Okay, so now I have these little pieces of fabric that will eventually become a basket. And what I'm going to do is turn them right sides together. Because all I have to do is just line up my top raw edge. And I try to keep, I don't want my big pin cushion over here. It's too big and it's likely to get pushed off, or, something would happen to it. I have it in the past. I will admit, I have in the past kept it over here. But it's really big and it just kind of gets in the way. So I try to keep this one nearby. This is one, it's so old. This was a class that we taught when I had my shop in Kansas. It's a little smocked piece of Liberty lawn with a spider daisy embroidery project thing done on the top. And one of my students, I think she was 11 years old. It was a Saturday class, and so she was able to come. She made this one for me. And it was so sweet because she loved this she loved this print, she loved this fabric, and I thought she's going, I didn't even think she was going to give it to me. It never even crossed my mind. And then, bless her little heart, she did. So I won't ever get rid of it. And I just stabbed my finger because I wasn't being careful with that pen. Oh. All right. So these are pinned. I'm going to sew this one first. I'm not going to put an interfacing on this basket. It probably will be very floppy, and that's okay. If you've never done a boxed corner or boxed bottom before, this right here is cut out this way, but it's manipulated a different way at the sewing machine. So for right now, all we're going to do is sew up this side and sew up this side. If this were cut, if the bottom part were cut, really what we would do is just come along and sew down this side, lift the needle, cut the thread, sew across the bottom, lift the needle, cut the thread, and then do the same thing on this side. These do not get sewn in this manner. It looks like that's what you would do, but if in the back of your mind you can tell yourself, if that were the case, why would we have to cut this out? Because then it would just basically form whatever this is-ish. So, but there is something that we're going to do to these boxed corners or boxed bottom edges that completely changes this. So just ignore the fact that they're there. You're not going to sew them. You're only going to sew up these two sides. Right? All right. Now I am using a straight stitch. I have white thread in my sewing machine, and it is coming off of the spool counterclockwise, and I have white thread on my bobbin, and it is coming off of the bobbin spool clockwise. That forms a really nice tight lock stitch. My stitch length is the default, which is 2 on the Bernina 1080, and I have my machine with the set with the needle down option engaged, and what that means is every single time I stop, my needle will stay in the fabric. It will be down and holding my fabric. That's really the only way I generally sew. I like having that extra hand, so to speak, and it works really, really well for a lot of people who work at their sewing machine a lot. So it's something to explore. All right, I'm going to use the edge of my sewing machine presser foot lined up next to the raw edge of my fabric as my seam allowance. I can do that because I'm making this project up. I don't have a pattern. It's just something I'm sewing from memory. It's not something with instructions that say to me in the instructions that all seam allowances are 5/8 of an inch, or all seam allowances are 1/4 of an inch. The outcome of your project will be very much based on the seam allowance if you're using a pattern. So, since I'm making this up, I know the size, I know what what I want at the end of the day. I can use whatever seam allowance I want to use. And actually thinking about this, I'm going to tell you how big this is, because I didn't do that. I just cut fabric and didn't tell you. So right here it is 17 inches across from the side to the other side, and on the fold it is exactly 10 1/4 inches from the top to the bottom where the fold is. So the width would not change from the 17 inches would be the same. And if you cut your fabric on the fold, you would need to cut 10 1/4 inches from the fold to the edge. So that's how you would get your folded piece of fabric. All right, so here we go. I need to move that out of the way. Now across the top here, I am going to lock the stitch, which means I'm going to come forward a few and then go back a few and then come forward and continue sewing. The way I do that is I have a button here on my machine that when I push it with my thumb, it makes my sewing machine go in reverse. I also have a reverse button on my sewing machine in case I need to sew a long section in reverse, but I don't. So I'm just going to use this little thumb button right here. So I'm going to go forward, and then I'm going to go backwards all the way to the end of the fabric, and then I'm going to come forward and go all the way down, not sewing over the pin. When I get there, I'll take it out. So out it comes. Put this back in my pin cushion and continue. And then I'm going to back up when I get to the end and do that lock stitch again. Reverse and then forward again. Okay. Then I'm going to lift my needle by stepping on the back of my pedal down here. Lift the presser foot and cut these threads and these threads and forward. I'm going forward just 5-6 stitches. There's no magic number on that. And now I'm going to go backwards and forwards. In place without the, I don't need to have these pins up here anymore because the stitches on each side are going to do that job. So I can remove these pins now, thereby reducing the risk of stabbage. All right, now here is where the boxed corner comes into play if you've never done one before. So what you do is you open this up, just like here it is like this. We're going to reverse this. We're going to take the two corners that where we cut, one on this side right here and one on the other side, and we're going to pull them out like this, and we're going to make sure that the seam that we just created and that fold on the bottom, which I do have, it's been pressed in there, line up. So my seam that's sewn and the line where the fold is are in the same place. So here they are, and I'm going to do the same thing. Now you can pin this if you want to. If you feel like that would make things a little bit more secure, then you can take your seam that you sewed and that line that's where that fold is and put a pin there, and then come under, and I'm going to use the side of my foot, my presser foot, on this raw edge right here. I'm going to stitch, and I'm going to back up, and I'm going to stitch. I'm not going to stitch over this pin. It's very damaging to your sewing machine. And for that matter, if you broke a needle, it literally could cause, you know, absolute peril to your health. It could get you in the eye. There's all sorts of things it could do. Now, when you turn this way, you can see There's the seam that we were sewing, and here's the fold, and they're lined up, and we have this nice boxed bottom. Now when you cut a 2-inch box out, basically what that does is you then have 2 inches on this side and 2 inches on this side, minus what you stitched, so that ends up being about 4.5. So did I put that too? Yeah. So there you go. So here is the other one, and I'm going to see if I can allow you to see. This is it pre-sewn. This is it after sewn. So you get a lot more space than you might originally think you would get, which I think is kind of cool. So when it looks like this, remember the corner that has been cut, not the outer edges, but the inside corner, you want to just pull that absolutely opposite of each other, and that will allow you to line up your seam and the bottom. If you had sewn the bottom, then you'd have 2 seams, but we have a fold. We can pin it if we want to. You know me and pins, I don't like them, but I'll do it. And then we're just going to sew. And in this couch, I did again. In this case, I'm using my presser foot as my seam allowance seam guide. I'm locking the stitch by backing up, and remove the pin and poke it in there. Locking those stitches, cutting the thread. Now anything that's on this, the outer part of your little fabric basket, anything that's on the inside is going to be covered up by your lining. So I don't feel like I need to finish those seams on the inside. I think that they're going to be all right. Okay, it is going to be just a little bit too floppy. I change my mind all the time. So what I'm going to do now is take the pins out of my lining, because I am going to add some stabilizer. I need a little bit of stability just because of the width of this project. Okay, so I'm just finishing up the side seam right here. And as you can see, I've added some press-on, basically fleece, I think. What's it called? High Loft. Here you go. So it's a fusible fleece. I order mine on Amazon. I do pay for it, obviously. This is a 20-inch by 1 yard, 36 inches piece. And I find that these store in my sewing closet really well. They're a good size. They're not too big. I don't have room in there for a full-on bolt of this. And I'm not a quilter, so I don't need a massive amount of this. But I do craft, and I do require it. It's something you have to have for a multitude of reasons. Okay, so like last time, we're just going to pull this, make our boxed corner. I'm not going to pin it this time. basically works out is the raw edges of your lining and the raw edges of your outer are going to be matched up. So you don't turn the lining right side out. You just leave it like this. This is basically the way it will look. And then you just set it into your project like this. And match up your corners. So you can just put your hand down inside. You've got the side seam on the lining matching up with the side seam on your outer, and I'm going to pin it for now. Normally I would be using my clips, and I probably will because this gets a little bulky and hard to deal with. Kind of smooth everything down on the inside and match up the other side like that. And then what we'll do is we're going to go to the ironing board, and I'm going to iron down a top edge about that much right there on the outer, and then I'm toward the inside, and then the lining I'm going to fold over toward the outside so that I end up with that. So the lining is folded toward me and the outer fabric is folded toward the lining, and then I can just clip and go all the way around doing this, and then come back to the sewing machine, rethread my needle because I just unthreaded it, and just do a top stitch all the way around. Okay, so I have everything pressed and clipped and ready to go. I always start kind of close to a side seam. And I don't need to do a lock stitch because when I come back around, I will go right over the top of these, and that kind of helps it to stay in place. It's not a stress point though, like a side seam would be, so it doesn't need that extra oomph. Now I'm just using a straight stitch, but if you have a decorative stitch on your sewing machine, which I do, but I'm not going to do that. I am also trying to conserve thread. You could do a decorative stitch across the top if you wanted to. We started. All right, so there is our little fabric basket all finished. The only thing I noticed is it's still just a bit floppy. And the way to fix that, if you've got a wide opening, is to put a magnet in the top right there. If you have a magnet or some type of clip, I recommend something simple. I don't really want to get too fussy with this. I'm not going to put a buttonhole and a button and all that stuff. The other option is to just pull it tight. If you do this, it's likely going to just kind of cave in on itself. But if you just do that, it'll stand up. They're so fun to make. They're so easy. That was just no time at all. I had the fabric. I had the interfacing, the fleece. I think they're fun. But now I must get busy on the yo-yo project because I'm going to be sending some to my sister. I gave some to my youngest daughter yesterday, and I'm going to send some to my oldest daughter. She also sews, but I tend to be a little craftier with crafts. These are the little ones that I was talking about that I made earlier with the little tiny paper clips. And they honestly just aren't, you know, I don't know what they would hold. They might work, but I don't know. The idea that I had for my daughters, the ones that I gave to my daughter, she's got a whole bunch of seed packets that I shared with her. And they're going to have a lot of leftover seeds in them, and having a way to close them up. I hope that everybody has a wonderful, fabulous rest of the day today, and like and subscribe if you wish. If you want to follow me on Facebook, it's Laurie's Heirloom Sewing page. I will link it below. I do appreciate each and every one of you. I consider every one of you to be a wonderful dandelion. Dandelions are our friends. So there you go. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.